The Life of Mr. Miyagi. Nariyoshi Kesuke Miyagi, or Mr. Miyagi as referred to by everyone, is the deuteragonist of The Karate Kid, The Karate Kid Part 2, The Karate Kid Part 3, and The Next Karate Kid. He is the teacher, mentor, karate sensei, and father figure of both Daniel LaRusso and Julie Pierce. He is the first leader of Miyagi-Do Karate. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Mr. Miyagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every week, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Background. He was descended from Shimpo Miyagi, who was very fond of both fishing and sake. One day, in 1625, while fishing and very drunk, he passed out on his fishing boat off the coast of Okinawa and ended up on the coast of China. 10 years later, Shimpo returned to Okinawa with his Chinese wife, his 2 kids, and the secret of the Miyagi family karate. This, along with Mr. Miyagi's claim from the first film that his ancestor derived karate from Chinese te, implies that Shimpo, like many Okinawan karate masters, was trained in Chinese martial arts during his stay in China. The secret of the Miyagi family karate appears to be a denden daiko, on which the drum technique is based. Other aspects of the style involve the crane technique, breathing technique, techniques from the kata tensho, and the kata seiuchin. Early life. Mr. Miyagi was born June 9, 1925 in Tomi Village, Okinawa, Japan. He learned karate originally from his father, who had been a fisherman. Mr. Miyagi claims his first fishing lesson from his father was in the quiet waters of Okinawa at the age of 2. Miyagi initially had a job working for the father of his best friend, Sato, who was also taught karate by Mr. Miyagi's father. In 1940, Mr. Miyagi fell in love with a young woman named Yuki, who was arranged to marry Sato, as prearranged marriages were a custom in Okinawa at the time. Miyagi made a big speech about wanting to abandon this tradition so that he could marry Yuki. Sato felt dishonored by this and challenged Mr. Miyagi to a fight to the death. To avoid the fight, Mr. Miyagi left Okinawa during the night and emigrated to the United States. Emigrating to Hawaii as a teenager, he worked as a farm laborer in the cane fields, where he met his wife, who was also a farm laborer. The two eventually came to Los Angeles, where she attended and graduated from the Santa Barbara University of California. After Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941, the U.S. officially announced formal entry into World War II. At first, Japanese and Nisei citizens were discouraged from volunteering, and those already in active service were demoted to reserve units over fears of sabotage. Military service. In January 1943, the United States Army issued a call for Japanese-American volunteers. Mr. Miyagi was probably among the initial recruits, most of whom came from Hawaii, as those on the mainland were reluctant to volunteer while their families remained in internment camps. For fear of espionage due to the Japanese lineage of the soldiers, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team was sent to the European theater. Stationed primarily in Italy, they fought the Battle of Anzio. While Mr. Miyagi was in the war, his wife, who was pregnant, was held at the Manzanar internment camp. Over the course of his military service, Mr. Miyagi was promoted to staff sergeant and was highly decorated. Miyagi's unit was the 442nd Infantry Regiment, one of the most highly decorated regiments in the history of the United States Armed Forces, including 21 Medal of Honor recipients. During his military service, he formed a very close relationship with his commanding officer, Lieutenant Jack Pierce, after he saved Mr. Miyagi's life. Mr. Miyagi taught him the art of karate in exchange for formal dance lessons. Sadly, while he was away in the war, Mr. Miyagi suffered the greatest personal tragedy of his life. His wife and their son passed away in Manzanar due to complications during childbirth when there were no doctors there to help. This was a loss that haunted him for decades, and he never remarried or had children, living a relatively solitary existence. Pre-Karate Kid. What Mr. Miyagi did in the interim between the war and 1984 is not fully known. Given his later career as a maintenance man, it can be assumed he gained at least some basic level of electrical and plumbing knowledge. At some point, Mr. Miyagi built his garden, something he was proud of and continued to work on until he passed away. He also spent some time restoring a collection of classic cars. The Karate Kid. In 1984, Mr. Miyagi works as a maintenance man in Daniel's apartment building. On one night, when Daniel is being beaten up by a bunch of Cobra Kai students, Mr. Miyagi swoops in and defeats the Cobra Kais. He then takes Daniel to his house to treat him. The following morning, Miyagi and Daniel go to the Cobra Kai dojo, where Mr. Miyagi tries to persuade Cobra Kai's sensei, John Kreese, to tell his students to leave Daniel alone. However, Kreese does not support his request and forces Mr. Miyagi to have Daniel fight Johnny. Mr. Miyagi wants the odds to be more even for Daniel and suggests that Daniel and the Cobra Kai students match up at the All-Valley Karate Tournament a few weeks from then. Kreese likes the challenge and agrees. He also agrees to order his students not to touch Daniel until then. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Miyagi has Daniel do chores such as waxing cars with a sponge by moving his hands and arms in a circle, sanding the walkway, staining his fence, and painting his house. Daniel, however, is frustrated that Miyagi is making him do chores instead of teaching him karate. Daniel eventually confronts Mr. Miyagi, who in turn tells him to show him the motions he'd been using to do the chores. After doing so, Daniel realizes that all the chores Miyagi has made him do are really defense tactics, reflex, and muscle-building exercises. Mr. Miyagi then attacks Daniel, who counters all his strikes. As the weeks go by, Mr. Miyagi continues to train Daniel and improve his technique. He teaches him to maintain strong balance and display offense. Daniel is able to learn the crane kick from Mr. Miyagi. At the All-Valley Karate Tournament, Daniel reaches the semi-final. In the semi-final, he faces Cobra Kai student Bobby Brown, who reluctantly and regretfully follows Kreese's order to perform an illegal kick and injure Daniel's knee. As a result, Bobby is disqualified and Daniel automatically advances to the final. Daniel is taken to the locker room where a medic tells him he won't be able to finish the competition. Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi to use acupressure to fix his knee. Though Mr. Miyagi tells him that he has nothing left to prove, Daniel insists that he will never be able to achieve his life's balance if he knows his tormentors have gotten the best of him. Mr. Miyagi agrees and partially heals Daniel's leg. Daniel returns to compete in the finals. Right before the final round of the match begins, Daniel takes up the crane technique pose and with an approving look from Mr. Miyagi, waits for Cobra Kai's top student Johnny Lawrence to make his move. Daniel kicks out with his leg and connects with Johnny's chin and face, scoring his third point, which results in him winning the match and title. Mr. Miyagi gives Daniel an approving smile when he yells to him that they did it. The Karate Kid Part 2. Following the tournament, Mr. Miyagi notices Kreese berating and choking Johnny for losing. He goes to Kreese and persuades him to let Johnny go, and Cobra Kai student Tommy agrees with Mr. Miyagi. However, Kreese threatens to attack Miyagi next. An angry Mr. Miyagi pulls Kreese off of Johnny. An angry Kreese attacks Mr. Miyagi, who dodges his attacks, which causes Kreese to punch car windows, severely injuring his hands as a result. Mr. Miyagi is ready to deliver a heavy blow, only for him to tweak Kreese's nose instead, making him unconscious as a result. Cobra Kai students left Kreese and Cobra Kai after seeing Kreese's true colors. 6 months later, Mr. Miyagi learns that his father is dying, and returns to Okinawa, where he is reunited with his childhood crush, Yuki. He even runs into Sato, Miyagi's childhood friend, who still holds a grudge against Mr. Miyagi for trying to marry Yuki, despite the old Japanese custom of arranged marriages. Sato relentlessly tries to goad Mr. Miyagi into a fight with him, but Mr. Miyagi just wants to make peace with Sato. Miyagi's father then passes away. Even after his father's death, Sato is bent on fighting Mr. Miyagi. He goes as far as to destroy the village in order to fight Mr. Miyagi. After seeing Sato destroying the village, an angry Miyagi agrees to fight him. However, after Mr. Miyagi saves Sato from death during a typhoon, Sato renounces his hate and asks Mr. Miyagi to forgive him. The two make peace. On the night of the Oban festival, when Kumiko, Yuki's niece, is performing, Sato's bitter nephew Chosen grabs her and forces Daniel to fight him. Mr. Miyagi and Sato try to encourage Chosen not to dishonor Sato, but Chosen refuses. While Chosen is getting the upper hand in his fight with Daniel, Mr. Miyagi advises Daniel to stand down, which then allows Daniel to flip him over. Eventually, Mr. Miyagi brings out his hand drum and beats it, which allows Daniel to understand how to win, and he ultimately beats Chosen. Similar to what Mr. Miyagi did to Kreese after the tournament, Daniel makes Chosen unconscious by tweaking his nose. The Karate Kid Part 3. After returning from Okinawa, Mr. Miyagi is left unemployed while Daniel is left homeless, due to the South Seas apartment being sold and the new owner deciding to tear it down and turn it into condominiums with a spa. However, Mr. Miyagi allows Daniel to stay at his house. Daniel decides to start a bonsai tree store after seeing Mr. Miyagi upset about having to give up his prized bonsai trees. While Miyagi advises him not to do that, as he knows Daniel's college education is more important, Daniel uses his tuition money to purchase a bonsai store. The two then work together at the bonsai store. At first, Daniel wants to re-enter the All-Valley tournament so that he can defend his title. However, Mr. Miyagi tells him not to, which Daniel eventually agrees to. However, unbeknownst to Mr. Miyagi, Daniel is soon forced to enter the tournament by Mike Barnes, who unbeknownst to Daniel for a long time has been hired by Terry Silver to beat and hurt Daniel in the tournament as revenge for causing his war buddy Kreese's students to quit Cobra Kai following the previous tournament, which ruined Kreese's life. One day, while Mr. Miyagi is teaching Daniel at his house, Terry shows up and gives both Mr. Miyagi and Daniel a false apology over Kreese's behavior after the All-Valley tournament, as well as lies to them about Kreese dying as a result of losing his students in order to gain their sympathy. Unaware that Terry is lying, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel accept his apology and apologize for what happened to Kreese. When Daniel decides not to participate in the tournament, he goes to Cobra Kai to tell Terry he does not want to compete, only for Terry to reveal his true motives. Mike and then Kreese appear when the former attacks and beats up Daniel. However, Mr. Miyagi, who had followed Daniel to the dojo, unbeknownst to Daniel, Terry, Kreese, and Mike, shows up and beats up Mike, Kreese, and Terry. Following this, Mr. Miyagi trains Daniel for the tournament. While Mr. Miyagi's teachings seem to be futile in the finals as Barnes repeatedly gets the better of Daniel and even terrifies him, causing Daniel to lose hope, Mr. Miyagi is able to pull him together, and Daniel is ultimately able to win the tournament in the sudden death round by using the kata move on Mike. After Daniel wins the tournament, he runs and hugs Mr. Miyagi. The Next Karate Kid. In the spring of 1994, Mr. Miyagi goes to Boston to attend the 50th anniversary of the 442nd Infantry Regiment and reunite with his war buddy's widowed wife, Louisa Pierce. In Boston, he meets her granddaughter, Julie Pierce, who is angry over her parents' recent sudden passing. He stays in Boston in order to take care of Julie. While she is cold to Mr. Miyagi at first, as time goes by, the two bond, and Mr. Miyagi teaches her karate the same way he taught Daniel. His lessons allow her to beat up a bully and Alpha Elite student named Ned Randall. After defeating Ned, Mr. Miyagi successfully defeats and humiliates Alpha Elite Sensei, Colonel Paul Dugan, who had been corrupting students into behaving violently and unethically. Mr. Miyagi and Julie leave after defeating Dugan. The rest of Dugan's team leaves too, shutting down Dugan's team for good. Pre-Cobra Kai. Even after Daniel's victory in the 1985 All-Valley tournament, Miyagi and Daniel continued to keep in touch. The bonsai store that they opened in 1985 ultimately failed. While it hadn't been confirmed whether or not Daniel trained with Miyagi after the All-Valley tournament in 1985, it can be implied that he has, as several years later an adult Daniel remembers his lessons and is much more skilled than he was as a teenager. Mr. Miyagi has also developed an extremely close relationship with not only Daniel's wife Amanda, but also their two children, Samantha and Anthony. Mr. Miyagi has also kept a very tight relationship with Julie after the events of The Next Karate Kid. Unfortunately, Mr. Miyagi passed away on November 15, 2011, which deeply saddened Daniel, Amanda, Samantha, Anthony, and Julie Pierce. Prior to his death, he tasked the Toguchi clan in Okinawa to hide the sacred scrolls of his karate and pressure point techniques, which Daniel had not been aware of. Cobra Kai Season 1. Mr. Miyagi left his house to Daniel, as Daniel now owns the property. The memory of Mr. Miyagi still continues to play a role in Daniel's life as he seeks to regain balance by practicing karate once again and becoming a mentor to Robbie Keane. He is mentioned several times by Daniel and seen in a few flashbacks. Cobra Kai Season 2. Mr. Miyagi is mentioned by name several times when Daniel is teaching Miyagi-Do Karate to his students. When Daniel is going over the lessons Mr. Miyagi taught him with Robbie, Mr. Miyagi appears in a flashback teaching Daniel. When Daniel reunites with Kreese, the latter taunts Daniel on Mr. Miyagi's death, which Daniel counters by reminding Kreese of his disastrous brawl against Mr. Miyagi. As some Cobra Kai students destroy Daniel's dojo, Cobra Kai student Hawk steals Mr. Miyagi's Medal of Honor, which incenses Daniel and intensifies the rivalry between the two dojos. The medal is eventually returned by Cobra Kai student Miguel Diaz to Robbie, who is staying at the LaRusso home. One day, Kreese shows up at Daniel's house where he threatens Daniel with war between the Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do dojos, as well as insults Mr. Miyagi's death a second time, by saying regards to Mr. Miyagi, which angers Daniel. After Daniel is forced to stop Miyagi-Do Karate by Amanda because of a school karate war between the Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do, which results in Sam getting hurt and Miguel getting severely injured, Daniel goes home where he takes down a photo of Mr. Miyagi and apologizes for failing his master's teachings. Cobra Kai Season 3. Daniel travels to Okinawa in an attempt to save his business. During Daniel's time on Okinawa, Mr. Miyagi appears in several flashbacks. Daniel meets Chosen Toguchi, now reformed following his defeat by Daniel, who reveals that he now teaches Miyagi-Do. Chosen is surprised by how much Mr. Miyagi revealed to Daniel, as Daniel is a foreigner, but Daniel insists that Mr. Miyagi treated him as a son and kept no secrets from him. Daniel and Chosen discover that Mr. Miyagi didn't teach Daniel about a deadlier aspect of Miyagi-Do, involving pressure points to incapacitate an opponent in preparation to kill them. Chosen suggests that Mr. Miyagi thought that Daniel wasn't ready or able to handle such techniques, while Daniel suggests that Mr. Miyagi was trying to protect him. After defeating Daniel in a sparring match, Chosen teaches him these techniques, and Daniel admits that he understands why Mr. Miyagi hid it from him. Chosen calls Mr. Miyagi a man of great honor that he can only hope to emulate. During the fight in Sam's house, Tori smashes the picture of Mr. Miyagi hanging on the wall. Looking at the picture of Mr. Miyagi, Sam finds her courage to stand up to Tori. During Daniel's fight with Kreese threatens to send him to Mr. Miyagi and attempts to kill him with glass, but is defeated by Daniel. When Daniel and Johnny fully reconcile, especially with their shared enmity to Kreese, they unite their schools using Miyagi's residence as their shared dojo. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.